This is part 6 of the Hellcat assembly build. In this part I will be installing the control horns on the flaps and ailerons, along with the push rods, and I will be installing the control horns on the tail section, and then the servos, push rods, and the fuselage. The last video was the transmitter setup. I wanted to have the radio bound to the receiver and somewhat set up so as I install the horns and the rods, I can adjust as I do this. I have the parts separated. For the flaps, it has the inside flap and then the outside flap. The control horns, you might be able to see there's a little slot right in here that I have to cut out. Has some balsa wood showing, and that way the calls to glue the control horn in with CA. Same for the outside flap, and I'm not seeing a notch for this control horn. And then the ailerons, connected, drilled the holes through, 2mm holes through the aileron, screwed in as a normal control horn would be. It calls to have the connector for the rod connector for the mounted on the servo arm, but for the ailerons, I think since it has a clevis on it, I will just do a Z-bend in the wire and then make any adjustments on the clevis side. For the flaps, I think I will use the rod connectors on the servo arm just for the flaps. Actually, what I showed earlier, I showed this mark right here. The control horn is up here in the slot. I cut a slit in the monocoque or the covering. Careful not to go all the way through. Now I will trim to have a little bit of the balsa wood showing. Don't want to score the wood or the balsa wood a whole lot. Just enough to get this covering off. So let me work on getting this covering off. I have the covering cut off from around the slot. The control horn, already put it in once. It is a tight fit. This goes in like such, and I will glue it with CA. We'll repeat the process for the other side. I cut the slot for the other side. I did do a CA on this side for the control horn, but I didn't like the way it was. Didn't seem like it was a good solid glue connection, so I think I'll try a 30-minute epoxy to glue these control horns on. I have these control horns glued in place, but now that I think about it, I probably should have checked the flap servo movement, which is one reason why I wanted to have the transmitter set up before this. I installed and connected the servos. I will connect the flaps up to the receiver and check the movement of the flap servos. As I mentioned, these have been epoxied, and I like the epoxy holding these control horns on much better. The flap servos, the center flaps servos are on channel 6. The outer are on channel 7. I did have to reverse the servos on the radio itself on both channels, but as you can see, first position flaps, second position flaps, so they're all moving in the correct direction, other than having to center the servo arm on a couple of these. Nothing was done except for the servo reverse. Next step, I can see in this one, this side, I can see the slot for the control horn. This other side, really can't see it, but I think I can feel it right in here. So I'll prep those, get those coverings cut off, and those control horns glued in. Okay, I have the outer flap control horns glued in. Let these set up, and I'll do the push rods. The next step I will continue on is with the flap section. I will install the push rods. I will take the servo arms off and drill a 2mm hole or 5/64 hole in the outside hole of the control arms or servo arms, and then the control horns I will do the same. I will drill a 2mm hole in the last or top hole. Let's do that real quick. Got pliers to hold the control horn, and get the drill in the hole. It helps to have a sharper drill bit. I'll continue on with the holes with the other two control horns. I'll take the servo arms off and drill those. Something I didn't mention before, the instructions called to put for the flap control horns this clip that goes on the bottom of the control horns for the flaps, but it being covered and all, I couldn't put this on without having to cut the covering off, so I just left these off and epoxied these as I showed you before. For the flap servo arms, you have the control rod or the push rod connector, 2 washers, and the nut and the set screw that will lock the rod in place, and it ends up looking like this. Don't want to get this bottom screw so tight where this doesn't freely turn as the servo turns. I will have Loctite on this bottom screw here. Got the push rod in place, so all you need to do, slide the arm on, and then put the rod or the servo arm back on the servo, then tighten up the set screw and put the servo arm screw back in place. I think I will wait till the final assembly to set the flaps, all the control surfaces, set it to the desired throws. I had the control rod connector onto the servo arm with the washers. I did a trial run or test run with it mounted to the servo and the rod connected to it, but I did not like the way it threw. It seemed like it was a tight fit. I don't know if you could see that or not, but with the washers on it didn't leave much room for the thread with the nut. So I took the washers out, so we have a little bit more thread showing, which I think will work fine. And I have these with Loctite on. I have the push rods connected to each of the flaps. I will power on the system, make sure the servo arm is centered, but I will mount the servo arms to more like a 45-degree angle or so towards the back of the trailing edge. I'll do that for each of these. I'll install the push rod with the Loctite on the set screw. I have the radio system turned on, so the servos are centered. I have a little bit of Loctite on top of a medicine cup, and I will show on one of the flaps what I do to set it up. Have the rod connector already on the arm. Insert the push rod into the connector. Have the servo arm at about a 45-degree angle. Put it on the servo arm. Have the set screw, put a little bit of Loctite on it, if I can keep it on the Allen wrench. Probably really don't need Loctite, but I'd rather be safe than sorry. Get that started, and I have the flap all the way down, or actually in the up position. Get the set screw tight. And we'll see how the flap goes. Don't like that buzzing sound, so let's see if I can take care of that. But I think in the when I do the final assembly, I will do the adjustments on the throws for the flaps and all the other control surfaces. I will do the same steps for the other three servos. I have each of the push rods connected to the servo arm. You can see these are about a 45-degree angle. And seem to be working pretty good. I will, again, during the final assembly, put the proper throws on the flaps and the control surfaces. Next thing I'll do is the servo arm screw. Then I'll get to work on the ailerons. I powered up the system again, and I wanted to check the throws of the servos for the ailerons. And they are moving opposite directions, which is good. And they look like they're the correct movement. Left and right, and left, and then right. Next steps will be to install the control horns, drilling a 2mm or it's the 5/64 hole, and install the push rod with the clevis and a Z-bend onto the servo arm. I have the push rod connected to the control horn for the aileron to line it up with the servo arm. Have it lined up there, looks good. Have the front edge of the bottom part of the control horn to the edge of the aileron. And we'll take a pen and mark where the drill see the two marks there, and I have a punch where I will make a little indentation for the drill bit. Have those marked, and we drill two holes, 2mm holes. When you drill, you want to make sure it's straight up and down as possible. I'm going to hold the aileron up to where it's flat or level. Get the drill bit on the mark I just made. Yeah, I think that's good. Do the same for the second hole. And then the holes on the other side where the mounting plate will go. The instructions say the screws for the control horn are 20 by or 2mm by 20, and it came with 2 by 30 and 2 by 15. So looks like the 2 by 30 is going to win. These are the only ones that will protrude through the other side of the aileron. Do a test fit of the screw. Alright, that's good. As you can see, I took the control or the push rod off. Alright, let me turn this over and get this screwed into the mounting plate. I have the control horn mounted. This side looks good. But turn the wing over, and apparently it wasn't as straight as I thought it was. When I drilled the holes, you can see the mounting plate is protruding over the front edge of the aileron, and when it deflects, it hits and prevents it from going any further. So no big deal. I'll just turn this down and we'll mount it again, and then put some CA on the screws, and I will do the same for the other side. I trimmed the back plate so it does throw much better now. I will trim these off after I get the push rod connected. I'll turn or power on the system to make sure the servo is centered. Hook this back up, and I have nice Z-benders that I will use to make the Z-bend in. I have the system powered up, and I put a little clamp on the aileron and edge of the wing to keep the aileron straight with the wingtip. So I will mark where I want the Z-bend. I will take the control horn off, do the Z-bend, reconnect the push rod, make any adjustments on the clevis side if needed. I have the rod cut in with a Z-bend, so we'll insert that into the servo arm, remove that little clamp, Actually, I think it needs to come in just a little bit. Okay, this feels flush with the wingtip. Yeah, kind of flush with the flap. I have the push rod connected. So let's do a test run on this side of the ailerons. Looking good. So this would be left, which is correct, right. And let me do the same setup for this side. It'll be the same steps as I did for here. I have the other aileron push rod connected. And smooth operation for both sides. What I will do now, I will put some CA, thin CA on the screws and cut the screws off both sides. And since I'm going to have my cutter out, I will, instead of waiting until the final assembly to cut these, I'll cut these as well. I have the push rods for the flaps cut with about a 1/4 inch or so on the other side. I have the screws for the aileron control horns cut, and this pretty much concludes the construction of the wing, except for adjusting the throws for all the surfaces, which I will do when the plane is completely done during the final assembly stages. Next, I will do push rods and the control horns for the rudder and elevator. As mentioned, the next step will be the elevator control horns. As you can see, I have the fuselage turned upside down. I have the push rods in their position so I can line up the control horn with the push rods. This has 2 control horns, one for either side. We'll line up the center or the holes of the control horn with the gap in the elevator section. Same process before. We'll line up the control horn, mark it, and use the punch to mark the holes for the drill bit, drill, and use these 2 by 15 millimeter screws to the back plate. I'll get these marked, installed on either side. Then the next step would be the rudder. Elevator control horns are in place. Flip this over. And here's the top. Have been trimmed and CA, thin CA put on the screws. Next will be the rudder control horn, which will be this area here. I'll put the push rod in and do the same steps. Line up, mark, punch, and drill, and put them together. Have the fuselage on its side. And same process with the elevators. Have the push rod in, line up the rudder control horn, line up the holes in the control horn with the gap, mark, punch, drill, and put together. I don't think I need to show you this again. Same like I did with the ailerons. The control horn for the rudder is installed. Screws have CA'd, and I cut the screws. I left a little bit protruding. But this concludes the installation of the control horns on all the surfaces. I will save the push rod insulation and servo insulation for the final assembly. Next step will be the tail wheel. So this concludes part 6 of the control horn installation.